So we'll go ahead and begin with the demo of several WSDL-related concepts. So believe it or not, a lot of our customers still use SOAP, especially the big enterprise customers out there that have a lot of SOAP from the early SOA days, and it's probably not going anywhere fast. A lot of them are only just starting to branch out and create REST APIs. And so let's dive into that quick. And if you have questions or comments as we go along, feel free to ask them. But in preparation for this, I spun up two gateways to represent a dev environment and a prod environment. And was somebody wanting to ask a question there? Okay. And we're going to start in the dev environment. And so I'm going to connect to that with Policy Manager. And I am using the Acme Warehouse SOAP service for this demonstration, but it could be any service that publishes a WSDL. And I did deploy something I created a long time ago to refresh a services WSDL on the gateway via an API of sorts. Recently, Ivan Henault asked for that capability, and I gave him this, and he went on to make some improvements to it, and he created another service that was a scheduled service to run periodically and get a list of all SOAP services on a gateway, and then call this particular service for each of those SOAP services to continuously synchronize the services on the gateways to the possible changing WSDLs behind the gateway that were used to publish them in the first place. So again, we're going to use the Acme SOAP service, Acme Warehouse SOAP service for this. I did publish this refresh WSDL service, and we'll come back to that later. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish a new SOAP service on my gateway to be a proxy to that Acme Warehouse SOAP service supposedly hosted behind my gateway. And I'm going to do that with a URL because that best supports the refresh WSDL service that in and of itself doesn't handle refreshing the WSDLs of services published to the gateway using a WSDL file. What it wants to do is force the gateway to go out and get the latest WSDL using the original URL. So I'm going to publish this SOAP service using a WSDL URL. And that worked, so I'm also going to listen for requests to the SOAP service on the gateway out of /warehouse/SOAP endpoint. I could go on to do additional things, but I won't. That will leave me with a simple pass-through proxy to the warehouse SOAP service. Now if I go to Firefox, I can browse for that WSDL. And the gateway gives me back the WSDL with the service endpoint rewritten for that proxy on the gateway. So a consumer of this WSDL would send all of its service requests to the gateway SOAP service endpoint. That's one of the basic capabilities we include with publishing WSDLs for SOAP services on the gateway. But it's referencing a schema import using a URL to that schema on the back end, on a back-end server. Now, when you publish a SOAP service on the gateway using a WSDL that imports schemas, the gateway will try to go get those schemas, and then it'll add them to the gateway's database so that you can get those imported schemas from the gateway's database later using a URL like this. And that's what I did with the Acme Warehouse service, and that's why I'm seeing the schema import schema location that looks like this. So that's an important capability to understand. But really what I want you to see here is that for this WSDL gotten from dev.uhg.com, it's referring us to a schema that's hosted on backend.dev.uhg.com. So that presents a problem to customers who want to publish a WSDL to external consumers of it who might not have network connectivity to this back-end server, right? And so when they try to go and create a, try to go and use this WSDL, it's likely going to fail because whatever tooling they're using it in can't go get the imported schema. So there is a way to change that behavior, and you can do that with a cluster property. So let's go to our cluster-wide properties and find the services WSDL dependencies enabled cluster property and set its value to true. And now if I come back and refresh this WSDL get, you can see the gateway's rewritten the schema location for that schema import to this gateway's URL for getting imported schemas from its repository. Okay, and you could even copy out this URL and open it in another tab, and it would display the schema. So that was one of the concepts that this customer is struggling with, that cluster property solved. Then the other one is if the policy of a SOAP service requires, authentication of a user, then we won't let anonymous people request the WSDL. And what they wanted is for any SOAP service published in their DMC for external consumers of that SOAP service to be able to let any of them get the WSDL for it regardless of what kind of access control policy was in the policy of the service. So what we'll do next is we'll just go ahead and add some likely access control policy here. We'll require basic auth credentials sent over SSL to be authenticated against the internal identity provider. And now if I go back to Firefox and refresh this, I'll get this message. And you'll get this same message, I believe, almost no matter what the access control policy is in the policy of the SOAP service that you're trying to get the WSDL from. So this customer also found that misleading, but we just got this one error message for this circumstance. So what you can do is you can go and set another cluster property to pass through WSDL requests without requiring their credentials. And that cluster property is also a service cluster property called pass-through downloads. And by default, if you're on the gateway and doing a WSDL get for a WSDL from a SOAP service that has access control policy, you'll still get it. But you can add any space delimited CIDR specified IP address ranges in here to allow anonymous gets of WSDLs to any client falling within that IP address range. So the way you open it up to the world is just like this, and that's just saying let any client IP address come get a WSDL from a SOAP service that has a policy that requires access control anonymously. So I'm going to come back here and refresh this. There's my WSDL again. So that was another concept this customer is struggling with, and that's a solution for that. Then this customer wanted to be able to have some way to refresh, to refresh the WSDLs of the SOAP services on the gateways without going through Policy Manager. So the Policy Manager way to do that would be to come in, go to the properties of the SOAP service, go to the WSDL tab, and say reset WSDL. Go upload a new file if that's how you get it. Or if you're pointing to a URL, just click OK. It went back out to the URL to get the latest version of the WSDL published from that URL. And that is the Policy Manager way to refresh a WSDL for the SOAP service on the gateway. This customer wanted a way to do that remotely, maybe automatically, and so that's where I showed them this refresh WSDL, which again, Ivan has taken, improved upon, created another service that depends on it that loops through all the SOAP services on a gateway and automatically, periodically updates WSDLs. But I didn't need all that for this customer, so I'm just using this one policy. So let's create a situation where we want to refresh the WSDL. I can go to this back-end service, go to its service properties, edit its WSDL, and remove a couple operations. So let's say we only want consumers of this service to be able to list products and get details of a product, but not place orders or view orders that have been placed. So I'm going to remove those two operations. Now, if I come here and refresh the WSDL, do a get on the WSDL for our proxy of that again, you see that it still has those operations in it. So I remove them from the backend service, but the gateway's WSDL for that backend service isn't aware of that. So this is a situation where we would like the gateway to refresh its WSDL to stop presenting those operations to people that come to get that WSDL and call that service through the gateway. Again, I could do that manually through Policy Manager, but in this case, I'm going to do it using that refresh WSDL API. So what I'm going to do is copy out the OID of the service, and then I have a URL set up for that API, and this is just requiring administrative credentials. And of course, I didn't give it a good service ID, so I get back an error message. Now I'm going to put this in here and hit that, and that refreshed the WSDL on the gateway. So if I come here and do a new WSDL get, I should see the current order request and response messages, and the place order request and response messages disappear from this WSDL. So there you go. So those were the WSDL related concepts we wanted to cover.